there's really not much you can choose from if you want to stay safe. So my triforce of steroids has always been testosterone, Primobolan, and Anavar. But based on the scientific literature, there's not much on Primo, man.
Yeah, growth hormone.
Growth hormone. Right.
I mean, I would say the safest thing that I would say would be testosterone and growth hormone, right? They're endogenous. You kind of at least can predict them as long as you're using a regular dose, right? Again, are you taking HIV studies and trying to translate into what we should do?
Yeah.
Right. Like when I used a bottle of Serostim a day, I followed the HIV protocol. My weight shot up.
You talked about dosages.
Massively.
We got it out of you. Hey guys, I'm super excited for this podcast. We're going to do this every month, or give or take, because we're the most nerdy guys in bodybuilding that post a lot. So I think we made a good trio to do this. We haven't decided on a name yet. I think Anabolic Roundtable is cool.
I like it.
Yeah, but we're open to suggestions, guys. So if you know a better name for this podcast, Super Physiological Man is taken, and I think that podcast is kind of over and done with, unless Derek comes out of the sauna. But this can be the Anabolic Roundtable, joined with Kurt Havens and Dr. Dean St. Mart. Let's get started with some introductions. Kurt, you're new on the scene, but you're the senior. So maybe we can get started with you.
Sure.
Who are you?
Who
is your daddy, and what does he do?
So I've been around fitness since, I think I started lifting in 1987 when I was 12. My father was always into this stuff, so he brought me to a gym when I was a little kid. I've been in the coaching scene for a while, probably since 1996-ish, but I didn't bother coming on the internet until very recently. But you want to talk about like my first entrance into this stuff with EAS?
Yeah. Go for it.
So man.
I spill the beans.
So I entered the first. I'm really dating myself here. The first Body for Life challenge. I don't even know if people know what this stuff is anymore. Bill Phillips owned a company called EAS, and he had a big book, and he was giving away $1 million to whoever could make the biggest transformation in 3 months. And I entered the first one. I did not win. But I did okay. I didn't get $1 million. But I had the opportunity to help them when they were working on coming up with the idea for how to make this thing scalable. And that was when I met Dan Duchesne, like we talked about. There was like the Denver Broncos. There was all of these professional athletes there, and no one was paying attention to any of them. They were all hoarding around this guy sitting at a desk writing. And I asked someone, who is that guy? And they were like, oh, that's Dan. Why does anyone care? Like everyone else is bench pressing. Like Shannon Sharp is literally bench pressing 405 for reps, and no one's paying any attention to what he's doing. And they're all focused on this guy. Like, he's the steroid guru. Okay. So I was a little late to the party. This is not stuff that I knew anything about at the time. I was like 20, 21. And so that was kind of my first foray into the world of bodybuilding. And I started coaching and doing that stuff in the background. I pursued medicine, then stopped, then got a different job, a corporate job for a bunch of years. And then when that ended, I got back into coaching, went back to school, master's, pursuing a PhD now in endocrinology. And I was literally watching you guys over last summer. And on a whim, I decided to reach out to Paul Barnett, and the rest has been kind of meteoric, I guess.
Yeah, I remember I saw you on Paul Barnett's channel. I'm like, okay, I got to get Kurt Havens on ASAP before he blows up. And now here we are. Right, your channel is growing. I see you're making the rounds with all the podcasts. Right, you're on Canadian Bodybuilding, and you're doing, where else? I see you everywhere, pop up in my feed. It's hilarious.
Oh, yeah, I'm all over the place. A lot of them just come on my channel now. AJ and I do a thing. You know, AJ's another one. So I looked up to him for years. He was always kind of a coach that I admired what he was doing. He always brought the guys in the craziest condition. And he was someone that I held in super high regards. And we became close friends very recently. So now we do a thing together. And kind of like what we're going to do here, I think my goal is kind of to bring a little more truth to bodybuilding. I just think there's a lot of garbage out there. And that's how I became friends with Dean as well. I mean, he has the same mission.
Yeah.
And we're trying to make this as, accurate as we can and kind of disclose what we know. right? And we're always learning. I'm the first to admit that I don't know everything, and I have made mistakes. I've said incorrect things. It happens.
It's a learning process for all of us. And I think us three and a couple other people in the fitness industry, we keep each other on our toes. And then we run stuff past each other. Like you mentioned that, Primobolan was finally showed as an aromatase inhibitor. And then I go through the studies. I'm like, wait a minute, that's a biotransformation study. And it's certainly possible, but this is fungi that produce these metabolites. So I went through all the drug testing, right, based on what you said. And I'm like, you know what, this is so interesting. So I went through all of the doping cases to see if these metabolites are actually present in humans. Couldn't find evidence that it is, but also no evidence that it isn't. Right? So I think through this collaboration road, I think we can all just raise the industry even more and more forward. Dean, you've been on my podcast now twice. Right? I've been following you for years because you were one of the few guys that actually, right back when I got started learning, one of the few guys that really made a scientific approach regarding the steroid stuff. So I'm happy that you're also on board of this Anabolic Roundtable. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, again, for the third time on my YouTube channel?
So I guess like you, I've got my wife to thank for what I'm doing now. It was Morgan that sort of pushed me online years ago when I first met her. She thought that what I sort of knew, and when I speak to guys at the gym, she's like, you really need to get online and get some value out there because you're keeping guys in our local environment safe. Why not apply that, to the whole world? And I guess that spiraled then into formulating supplements with Lee at Supplement Needs. And then I guess like what we've all come up against, you've got sort of an abrasiveness when you're starting to debunk bro science, where it's sort of like, well, we've done this for years. And you're like, well, no, this is the actual what's going on. That my mission has always been just to keep this as safe as possible, or keep guys lifting and, doing things within reason and trying to actually back it up with some actual evidence than, having an authority of saying just because I say so. So my background is in drug design and pharmacology and synthetic chemistry. So all throughout my study years with my PhD, I got fascinated with bodybuilding. I had to sort of transition. I was a kickboxer and I transitioned away with a smashed ankle injury. So I had to sort of replace one sport with another. And that's where obviously then questions come in when you're reading online. And like all of us, when you're in your like early 20s, what you think you know from what you've studied versus what the real world says and what papers say is completely different. That I guess bodybuilding's beauty is that some of it is backed up by science, but then we also see how far science is behind sometimes. That anecdote comes first and then the science comes later.
Yeah, that's very true. And we see now a lot of stuff that slowly gets proven that we've been doing for years, maybe even decades. And then maybe with some small nuances, the scientific evidence is slightly different. But it is always good to see that some things finally get confirmed. Like we've been talking about Mastrone and Primobolan being potential aromatase inhibitors, or some of its metabolites. And then slowly you see some scientific evidence that might support that to a certain extent. Even though we clearly see, in real world practical applications that at least Primo and Boldenone and in some individuals Mastrone do lower estradiol levels. And I think, we're just a little bit ahead of our time sometimes in the things we say. For the guys who don't know, I'm Vigorous Steve. I'm under an alias because I promised my family not to involve the family name. So one of the few guys out there that still goes by an alias, just like the good old forum days. I have a bachelor degree in knowledge engineering, so I know how to figure stuff out. And even though I'm not technically trained on scientific literature and biochemistry or pharmacology, I think I'm slowly piecing it together over the last 25 years that I've been bodybuilding. And for me, my YouTube channel was just about giving back because, I learned so much through bodybuilding, whether that's about training or nutrition or pharmacology. Of course, everybody wants to see about the steroids. So it's mostly about steroids on my YouTube channel now. You get typecast, as you guys also get typecast. And you make a training video nobody watches. So that's basically where I ended up. It's like, okay, you guys want to see more pharmacology stuff? I'll gladly do it. And that maybe brings us to the first topic. Right? We have a list of topics. I want to know from you guys what the harm reduction models are and have those changed over the last couple of years? Because everybody's about harm reduction and risk mitigation. And then we have IFBB pros, who we all aspire to look like. But I don't think they go hand in hand.
Something that I see firsthand now that is very new to the industry is years ago you had the guys that were enhanced, like pro bodybuilders, right? Or gym rats that were just wanted to do gear. And you had natural guys, right? And there was a clear line between the two, right? And you knew what you were and you kind of hung out with those guys and you had a very firm belief in what you did, right? There was sometimes obviously natural guys would become enhanced guys over time. But now there's this odd use of TRT, right? Like TRT has become this over popular thing with young kids, right? That clearly don't need TRT. That's where I think TRT in and of itself is a fantastic thing. I think when you have 20-year-olds doing TRT, I'm not sure what the function there is because they're probably not hypogonadal. And then on top of it, to play with this supposed safe thing is then they're adding other at least in America, they're adding things that are not legal, like Trenbolone, on top of this to leverage a performance benefit without ever actually using testosterone as a performance tool, right? They're just like, it's almost like using Lantus. They're just creating like a baseline with testosterone and then stacking other things on top under the guise of TRT, right? Or some sort of enhanced TRT. And then you have everything above that, right? Then you have the standard steroid cycles and stuff. But I think that this is where, whether this was from our other friend in Thailand who created this supposed safe model of usage, wherever this came from, this is what's confusing to me because when you look at the data, like guys like Bhasin, right? We've seen so many times that up to 600 milligrams of testosterone was considered safe for healthy individuals. It's where this all of a sudden came from, that testosterone was not a good thing and you want to leverage all sorts of other stuff on top of it. You know, at the low level, at the TRT level, that's, I think, what's confusing to me is why is that considered safer, right? And also then why is it considered safer to use something like Masteron to control estrogen versus something like an AI, which has been proven?
Yeah, it's just, I think people like to reinvent the wheel and get credit for stuff, when in reality, the credit always goes to the researchers. So there's a lot of studies, at least on testosterone and nandrolone, that shows that it's somewhat safe and efficacious. And then when you do the similar research on other performance-enhancing drugs or other anabolic energetic steroids, you see that the safety and efficacy, or the efficacy is there in medical treatment, but the safety data is severely lacking. So there's now a lot of extrapolation from animal models, whether that is safe or not. Well, we can go to this study. So this is the Bhasin study where they go from 25 milligrams testosterone to 600 milligrams testosterone per week, correct? For 12 weeks or 20 weeks?
20 weeks.
Yeah.
And then there's a washout period as well.
Yeah, there's a washout period as well. Yeah, so this is quite an interesting study. This is one of the few high-dose studies where they actually compare different dosages, because there's other studies where they go in reasonably high dosages, but that's all in particular medical treatment. This is in healthy individuals. And is this a study where they were specifically instructed not to train? Or is that the other one?
It should be this one. And what's fascinating, though, from a background point of view on this study is, at least, again, I can only speak to what goes on in the United States. In the United States, until Bhasin came out with these things, the medical community here was in disbelief that testosterone had any positive effect on muscle. So as a whole, physicians didn't understand that testosterone grew muscle. It was disputed. So we refer, like in the endocrinology world, it's actually referred as like the pre-Bhasin era and the post-Bhasin era, which we were living in the post-Bhasin era now. So he was pretty groundbreaking in what he does and what he did.
Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting to me, these kinds of studies, because it also shows, I think, the changes on lipid parameters and liver enzymes, and they track quite a few markers. And with Anavar, that's also been indexed. I mentioned that in my Anavar deep dive. But a lot of the things that are now part of risk and harm mitigation models are either not studies on humans at all, or have never been studied on healthy subjects.
Yep.
They've been studied on postmenopausal breast cancer, right? Or short stature or something like that. And then the dosages are ramped up to, well, in the grams, which is, I don't know, it's hilarious to me, but at least testosterone is bioidentical. If you want to ramp that up to a gram or two, that is what bodybuilders, pro bodybuilders have been doing for decades now, and to kind of ramp up something else that isn't even FDA approved for humans anymore, always seemed a bit weird to me. Now, does it get results? Of course it does, but there's a lot of different things that get results. Dean, what's your take on it? Because you've been very adamant about harm mitigation, for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I've never, when you're accused that you're against medication or whatever, I've always been like, well, use a medication for the right purpose that it's designed for. And I guess one of the things that we probably all agree on the same point of view is you don't just start taking medication for what ifs. Like, what if I get high blood pressure? You take it to address blood pressure. Like, it's, when we look at, harm reduction, again, the three of us probably share the same thing towards oxidative stress is the biggest number one risk factor when you're messing with these things. And unless you have a good understanding of what oxidative stress is and how to mitigate it, it doesn't matter what blood pressure medication or statin you use. If you don't address oxidative stress, the statin is buying you time, basically. And, that's, when we look at the models of cardiovascular disease since like probably the late 2000s, they're now starting to really see the beauty of oxidative stress and foam cell production causing atherosclerotic plaque, as opposed to, high LDL is dumping cholesterol into the arteries through ApoB. That's part of the equation. But the other side of it is if you've got LDL particles and you lower the production of cholesterol with a statin, the incidence rate or the relative risk reduction with a statin, I think, is like 3 in 100. So it's 3% people from a primary setting won't have a heart attack. And that's because you're still oxidizing cholesterol at 100% the capacity. It's just 50% the number. So when you're coming at it from that angle, and the biggest thing you can actually educate someone on then is oxidative stress, and viewing that LDL is just a particle being made in the liver for a job, but it's getting, damaged in the process going around the body, whether that is oxidative stress from anabolic steroids, depleting, intracellular glutathione or vitamin E, vitamin C, or whether that is your nutrition or the environment itself, like pollution or electromagnetic radiation, whatever's going on. By understanding that oxidative stress is your biggest enemy when you're using these, anabolic steroids, even testosterone, you're setting yourself way above having the requirement for any medication to begin with. That should be like your pillar at the top of oxidative stress with your sort of nutritional choices, how you're going to mitigate the oxidative stress risk. And then from there, look at, what medications fit the different problems or purposes that I require. So, there's no arguing that angiotensin 2 goes up when you take testosterone if you are either genetically susceptible or in a dose-response relationship setting. That doesn't necessarily mean like straight off the bat because you're using testosterone, here's your A or B. It's designed to serve the purpose of, like we done a podcast, me and Kurt, of if your blood pressure goes up, immediately question your environment, your nutrition, so your hydration balance, how much fluid you're ingesting, arterial flexibility,
even sleep, how much sleep you get.
Sleep apnea, all these things contribute.
Alcohol, even eating fruits and vegetables will lower it.
It's like you're looking at the bigger picture than immediately using a drug to solve a problem, which is great, which we have clear open access to address problems very quickly with medications. But they're normally addressing the symptom as opposed to the actual root cause. So when I started to sort of even come into the scene, it was with that viewpoint of having like conventional pharmacology training of how drugs were designed to treat problems. But from my own study then of like functional medicine, of asking like the root cause question of why do you have high blood pressure? Why do you have high blood glucose? Consistently asking why until you get to the bottom of the problem. And I guess that's where like even my when I went into chemical engineering, it was always asking why has the problem happened until you get to the root cause. And if anyone's interested, like I think there's I don't know who came up with the concept, but there's from problem solving, it's called 5 whys. Normally you can get to the root of a problem by asking why 5 times. You ask why several, like, so you answer your question and you ask why to that answer, and eventually you'll come to the root cause question.
Well, what I always find striking is with some of these safer use models is that, of course, the ancillaries are thrown in right from the start, but it doesn't really, like you mentioned, there's no questioning of how can we solve this without throwing the medication at it, right? Telmisartan or angiotensin receptor blockers to lower blood pressure. What about the magnesium? What about the potassium? What about the hydration, the sleep apnea, the sleep quality overall? Right? All these things should be considered first before a medication is used. And of course, some of these medications have overlapping benefits, just like beta blockers. But you don't have to throw a beta blocker and an angiotensin receptor blocker at it, and then maybe even an aromatase inhibitor just preventatively in case of gynecomastia. I mean, these things are used as needed when all other options have failed. So that's why I found it surprising that safer use models nowadays revolve around more medications, not more intelligent design of nutrition and the lifestyle. When in reality, it should be fucking about the lifestyle. Right? It's just about taking stuff. That's not what bodybuilding was about. It was about training, nutrition, and then later on some performance enhancers and ancillaries where needed. So this is it's very weird to me, especially ramping up the dosages of particular compounds. Like angiotensin receptor blockers, 80 milligrams per week or per day, right? No problem. And then aromatase inhibitors, they're the devil. Because when you read the postmenopausal breast women or the breast cancer studies, you see that all have terrible side effects. Now, when you compare the side effects of postmenopausal women with bottomed out estrogen levels and the side effects of aromatase inhibitors, they're basically identical. Why? Because in both instances, serum estradiol is 0. So if you take that away and you look at the studies of hormone replacement therapy where men are taking a low dose of an aromatase inhibitor, where serum estradiol is in the middle to the top of the reference range, depending on biofeedback and response of the patient, no adverse effects. And how many compounds out there actually lower estradiol, right? Should we remove the zinc?
Yes.
Or remove the tadalafil? Or remove the nicotine? Well, nicotine, I mean, it has some nootropic benefits if you take it as a patch, but smoking should be removed. There's so many compounds out there that lower estradiol. Metformin lowers estradiol. Right? And then metformin is then pushed in these safer use protocols.
Well,
so I find it very funny, I must say.
What I like when we come to a discussion surrounding like aromatase and inhibition is like what you say, you're not looking to pop them as smarties of like this prophylaxis of I'm going to take 25 milligrams of Aromasin every day just in case I get high estrogen. When you look at like the clinical data of Aromasin, you can get a very good understanding that 25 milligrams every 3 to 4 days is going to lower the aromatization rate by about 70%, 60 to 70%. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to take 25 milligrams every 3 days or 4 days. It just means that 25 milligrams every 3 to 4 days is a 70% reduction. You go to 12.5 milligrams, now that's 30% reduction. You've got a way of controlling the aromatization rate quite predictably than, someone turn around and say, oh, well, let's add in 150 milligrams of Masteron to control your high estrogen, when you don't know how much of that molecule is going to interact with the aromatase enzyme, how much of it's going to be excreted. I get that side of things where it's like, well, you could just add in more androgens because of the evilness of AIs. But when you really debunk that argument, when you get down to the nitty gritty argument of AIs versus another steroid, Aromasin exemestane is basically the same structure as Baldanone, aside from the C7 substituent. So you're literally you're taking something that is steroidal to block aromatase specifically. So your argument of adding in Masteron or Primobolan is defunct once you say Aromasin is a steroid backbone, very similar to Baldanone.
And Baldanone has a metabolite known as arimistane, which is being sold as an over-the-counter pro-hormone, but in reality it was just an aromatase inhibitor that was, a suicide inhibitor. Also gets stuck in the aromatase enzyme, just like arimidate or Aromasin, and basically rendering it inactive. So But then, of course, you can say that boldenone, due to its oxidative stress, is kidney toxic. And that brings us back to the oxidative stress, which there's also scientific evidence that shows that you need the oxidative stress, otherwise you blunt the post-exercise stress response, and then it's less anabolic. All right, so now people think that they need the oxidative stress, they need to forego the post-workout vitamin C, vitamin E, fish oil, glutathione, etc., or taurine, right? There's so many things that are antioxidants, melatonin, methylene blue, whatever. They're trying to forego all of that. And then as a result of that, we have a lot of bodybuilders in chronic oxidative stress, literally looking like ashtrays in the face.
Yeah, the aging is a big thing.
When even
Those are all running the safe for use protocols.
And even to back up for a second, using the right drug for the right thing. So the ARB usage stemmed from the water retention that was from estrogen. So instead of addressing the estrogen, they were addressing downstream what was occurring, right? To try to just block the water instead of managing the estrogen issue, right? Yeah. Because the same, like you're saying, God forbid you actually control your estrogen, right? Because apparently an estradiol of 200 in men is clearly very anabolic. That's why women tend to be very muscular.
Yeah. Yeah, because it raises IGF-1, right, in animal models.
Yeah, because they're missing a binding protein that we seem to have is the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm waiting for patiently is for the systemic wide-stem use of dopamine reuptake inhibitors because of they're allowing their estrogen to go so high that serotonin is so high in their brain that dopamine goes the opposite way with the seesaw. You've already got potentially a subset of these models where SSRIs are becoming, it's not to say that you can't use an SSRI. And I know from watching your video, Steve, you definitely have to modulate that as well in terms of a fine balance between dopamine and serotonin. No. But knowing full well how estrogen influences serotonergic transmission versus dopamine, there could be, you're going to get guys going out and buying antipsychotics to try and drive their dopamine level up because of their brain chemistry's off.
Yeah. They're chasing that Trenbolone high.
Yeah.
Because it's literally a psychoactive drug, basically. It's nothing in the clinical literature regarding psychoactive, but I mean, I'm running 25 milligrams Trenbolone per week now after not having taken it for close to a decade. I did my Trenbolone deep dive. I figured 25 milligrams per week is the disassociation dose between anabolism and androgenic response at 100 kilograms body weight, based on the private discussion we had, me and Dr. Dean, on how to interpret the Hershberger bioassays, which were updated with the new standardized version. So I went through all of those, the research, right? I combined it and I figured, it seems that Trenbolone is 9 times or 8.8 times more anabolic than androgenic at 25 milligrams when you're 100 kilograms, based on animal studies using highly dubious extrapolation. Did I get great results? Absolutely. Did I get a dopaminergic response? Absolutely. People are telling me on the Vigorous Q&A based on my videos that my behavior has changed. So imagine if you run your Trenbolone sky high and then let your estradiol run sky high, which you can't even detect your estradiol because Trenbolone detects as estradiol on your blood work. So what is Trenbolone? What is estradiol? Kurt, you mentioned to me that Trenbolone is built off estrogen. Mm-hmm. Can you go into depth of that?
Well, it's just an E strain steroid. So we start with the 19 NORs. It's easier to start with estrogen rather than start with testosterone and reduce. It's easier to go up from estrogen. When you just look at the structure, that's just how 19 NORs were. Basically, we arrived at them. I don't believe AJ Birch, the guy who invented Nandrolone, I don't believe that's how he started. I think he started with testosterone and was modifying it. But I think over time, it's just become more apparent that it's easier to go that direction.
So how many steps are there in between estradiol and Trenbolone? Is there 5 steps of why?
Let me look.
That would be funny.
Not stuff you're going to do at home. This is not stuff you're going to do in your bathtub at home.
No? Too bad.
No.
But you can reduce Phenoplex tablets.
You could do that, sure. Except the new Revlar stuff you can because the polymer. Good luck melting the plastic.
Oh, wow. I never really looked into this bathtub approach of how to extract Trenbolone without the estradiol from the Revlar S and other formulation tablets.
Yeah, back in the day, they had the steer and the heifer ones, right? So you would just use the heifer. And I think that's a lot of guys made that mistake. They would use the steer thinking that, well, that's for a male cow. I'm going to use the steer one. And then they would wonder why they get gyno almost immediately from it.
Yeah, that's the one that has the estradiol in it.
Yeah.
And then pretty high dosage. And the weird thing is in the animal models, they use, a couple implants in the ear 4 months before they get slaughtered. And they make phenomenal gains. But when you break the milligram dosages down, it's like 2 milligrams per week for a 1,000-pound animal.
Yep. And they have a similar androgen receptors to the human, right? They're very, very similar.
So why don't we get those results? What's going on here?
Well, it only seems to be in steers as well. So I think part of the problem is our testosterone or our final growth, like we're too close to our final growth potential. Versus if you give it to a steer who's not anywhere near their maximum growth, you see much bigger growth. When you give it to a bull, they get almost nothing out of it.
Ah, right, because the bull is already fully matured, right?
Yeah, so I think the problem is humans through puberty, basically we've gotten to our genetic potential, our natural genetic potential just through growth, like linear growth, right? So we just don't have that. So it's not to say, it's so ethical what it is. It's not to say if you gave it to someone before puberty, who knows where it would go.
Well, there's plenty of case reports. All you have to go is to TikTok.
There you go.
So to get back on the safer practices, like, can we set a couple ground rules and guidelines for our audience to kind of, navigate through the sea of misinformation and just make some proper decisions from themselves? Like, I'm sure all three of us have made mistakes in our time of experimenting with performance-enhancing drugs. But now, after decades ahead, right? I mean, for Dean, it's been decades. For Kurt, it's been, close to half a century.
With performance enhancing, no. I didn't start, I didn't use any performance enhancing until I was 40.
Oh, so you've been on for a decade now.
So I did, when I was 21, I got Greek Deca amps. The Helios, those blue top ones. I don't know if you remember those.
Yeah. Norma Hellas. Yeah.
Norma Hellas. And I didn't know, there was no internet. This was like 1997 or 98. So I didn't know what to do. I injected into an orange first to see how that would work. Sure. By the second dose, I felt absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not touching this garbage ever again. And then it was another 20 years before I touched that garbage.
All right.
So yes, I didn't start. I was pretty adamantly against using stuff. I focused on food and training, for as long as I could until my composition went the other direction.
Right. Yeah, because of age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
what about you, Dean? How many years has it been?
2012. But I guess my entry into it was like what we discussed with hypogonadism, where you just now it's a lot more advanced in terms of how it's diagnosed. But back then it was just like banging your head on the wall. That's like, right, I'm just going to put my own knowledge to the use here. But I've put stuff like on Instagram, like where you do stuff to prove bro science wrong, where you're just like, well, they're all saying that this works, and then you're like, in your head, it doesn't work, and you're like, well, I'm just going to try it anyway just to see. And like 100 milligrams of Tren Ace every day for 2 weeks, and then realize that nothing, and this is just by itself, and then just realize afterwards that now I don't mental sides or ever, nothing like that touches me with 19 hours. I remember at the end of it going, where are they where's these conclusions coming from online? And so that myth went straight in the bin of going back to, like with you, where you're just using the very smallest amount possible in order to have that anti-catabolic effect in a prep. And obviously the reverse of it, I never utilized it in a growth phase, so I can't say how anabolic it is to speak. So, that is like the curious scientist, where full well what's being said is completely wrong. Like, well, let's just give it a go to validate science and see that it doesn't work. Like another experiment was 1,000 milligrams a test. And sure enough, I blew up, but I blew up with a lot of water retention as well. You're walking around the gym, pretty full and strong and brutish, but then you're realizing, okay, well, how healthy is it to run this sort of in terms of like tissue being gained versus a much lower dose? And you're like, you can see how pros potentially escalate their way up in terms of like that overall size, how strong you get, the more motor recruitment you get from it, and blah blah. That higher dose probably does bring better effect if you're able to tolerate it long term, but the tissue, the size, the volume that comes on is fluid retention, to speak like Kurt always says, like side effects as opposed to positive effects.
Injectable side effects.
Yeah. You know, like that when you're finished, like how much of it is tissue you carry, like now, like TRT, the periodic pineapple thrown in that I put on the Instagram that, and I carry 200 pounds, whatever, 90 to 92 kilos, relatively easy with that little support. Yeah. So it's like, how can you hold that muscle tissue long term as opposed to, blowing up, gaining a lot of size, but actually how much of it is muscle mass?
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of water, and then you need to throw the ancillaries at it again. Right. Yeah. So I will say that 2,500 milligrams of testosterone was the best cycle I ever did. That was tested in an aromatase inhibitor and growth hormone and some insulin. It was great. It was in a cutting phase. So obviously you're not as big as during the off season when you run half that, but eat a boatload of food. But would I do that now? No, because for me, the weird thing is like I've learned so much in the meantime, right? I used to be like the hardcore bro scientist and just collect anecdotal information and put that to practice and then make that my own and then share that with my bodybuilding clients. And then over the last couple of years, I've become more evidence-based. And even though I realize that the evidence is far from complete, so we still have to fill in the gaps with basic human biology and the anecdotal experience. But would I do that now? No, man.
Yeah. I had two current things that similar to that where I was looking back at old photos and I realized the leanest I ever was when I was natural because I worked harder. And I was younger, but I worked harder, right? You don't have a choice, so you have to put the work in. Yeah. And then when I started hanging out with AJ, I kind of use him as a role model for a lot of things. And he doesn't need a lot of stuff because the man works harder than anyone I know. And so it kind of changed my outlook too. I was like, you know what? I'm just being lazy. Why am I leaning on androgens so heavily? And I just don't need it.
Yeah, and you don't need it. I will say that as you get older and you get more demanded financially and business-wise and family-wise, you just move less. So it's actually harder to get lean. And of course, we can do the standing desk and do a little treadmill underneath. But when you were younger, especially when I was drug-free for 10, 11 years before I took the plunge at 26. So I've been probably cycling the longest out of all three of us. Made plenty of mistakes. And going to the steroid message boards. But I was also my leanest most of the time when I was drug-free because I was just moving around more. I think metabolism is better. And now I'm just sitting at the computer doing research, making YouTube content. Yeah, and then it's way harder to get lean. So now my diets last like 26 weeks instead of doing it in 12 weeks. Yeah. And I do use androgens. So for me, like a safer practice would be is just to put like some sort of cap on your body weight and just use the lowest cocktail. And I'm not against using multiple different compounds together alongside of it, right? For just a low and effective dose, 2.4, I use growth hormone, a little bit of test, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Of course, my cocktails are still 10 compounds because I still like to experiment. But then I run my blood work every month to see what the changes are. And if I feel that it's not really getting the job done or it's affecting my health, then okay, you take a step back. And I think as long as you do the blood work and then kind of cap yourself a certain body weight, I think that is probably the safest route you can go or mitigate harm with organ imaging. Yeah. And then as you get older, the dose just get less. And of course, the body weight should get less also. It's just natural part of aging.
I mean, even the British Society of Sexual Medicine, the BSSM guidelines for testosterone replacement therapy, nowhere within that guideline this is used worldwide. So they set TRT or prescriptive TRT for a total testosterone of less than 12 nanomole or a free testosterone value of less than 0.22. So you have to meet those two criteria in order to be legally prescribed testosterone. nowhere in that guideline paper do they touch about nutritional practices when someone starts TRT. So, having a discussion as a GP to your patient that you're now increasing your androgen levels, so you're going to have potentially elevated oxidative stress. So the nutrition aspect doesn't even enter into the medical community of seeing, this is a potential problem of why we might see cardiovascular disease associated to TRT if the underlying fundamental lifestyle isn't being managed when someone's prescribed these drugs. And the other side of it, I had to laugh in the paper was, in part of like the clinician recommendations, it was like, it'll be at the discretion of your GP whether they check your serum lipids or your blood glucose whilst doing therapy. So they completely just ignore like the basics of blood glucose metabolism and lipid metabolism when you're at a higher androgen level than your like natural baseline.
And let's be honest, 9 out of 10 of those patients which are androgen deficient are there through their own doing, right? That's lifestyle. It's like diabetes. Androgen deficiency and diabetes, in my opinion, in 9 out of 10 people is lifestyle disease.
Yep.
So their lipids will be skewed and their glucose levels will be skewed. Right? The fasting insulin levels will be sky high, hemoglobin A1C off the chart. So God forbid getting them healthy first. That's why when I made a video series about things to consider before TRT. And then I think I had like 40 minutes of disclaimers of things you could look into. And regarding like testicular ultrasound for varicose seals and necrotic tissue or whatever. Like some kids played a lot of soccer and got kicked in the nuts. And then that manifests like decades later, And all these things you can look into nutritional wise as well, sleep wise, like we mentioned earlier regarding the blood pressure. But I think this new generation is just not willing to do that because there's now so much steroid talk online. And the older generation is not willing to do that because TRT is basically the new sports car. And it's cheaper than a Ferrari. It's sexy. It's nice. You have the libido and energy levels to sleep with the young girls again, right? But you don't have the money for the Ferrari, so you go with the TRT. Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. This whole. So again, I think the foundation should always be there, like health first, nutrition, exercise, over-the-counter supplements, just to support what you can't get from your nutrition, and blood work and organ imaging, and then a certain dose to get the job done. And then if you want to turn pro, okay, harm and risk mitigation just goes out the window, and then hopefully you're smart enough to consult with a guy like me, Dean or Kurt, once in a while, so we can reel you back in, or help you strategically choose shows so you can do 3 shows on one cycle and the rest of the year you're kind of off.
Yeah. I find work with pros, the open guys specifically, what separates them from everyone else is their tolerance of risk. They just don't really have
what risk?
They don't have, they're not averse to risk at all. Right?
Yeah.
So versus you see even in the physique and the classic guys, even at the top level, most of those guys still have concerns about their health.
Yeah.
The open guys don't seem to be as concerned.
No. But they also respond better. Because the cycles of the open guys, like might be 2 or 3 grams in total, and a good amount of growth hormone, right? Like they have HIV themselves. But that might be, besides the growth hormone, the cycles might be lower than some of the classic physiques, at least the amateur level.
In some, in the pro, without
you've
naming
seen the
names,
5 gram cycles also.
I have a bunch of 5 and 6 gram guys in the open category.
Yeah. Disclose the cycle, just general. Like what are the pro cycles?
It's back to kind of what, and I just, I think I just did a video on this too. It's something that I feel like I knew all along because it's what I was implementing in my coaching business. And then when I got on the internet, I think I was convinced otherwise that it was Test and Primo, that everyone just used Test and Primo. No one used Anecdotal anymore. No one used Trenbolone. It was all this stuff, right? No one used an AI. And then I started coaching these guys, and that's not what I saw at all. So it's the standard is grams of test, whatever they can tolerate. Is that 2 grams? Is it 3 grams? Is it 5 grams? It tends to be so. The problem with things like nandrolone is you basically run out of room there, right? You can only run nandrolone so high before it becomes really not fun. So a lot of them don't even
Primo, right? It's low dose concentration.
So you basically just they don't even mess with those things. A lot of times it's back to EQ again. because it's cheap and they can use tons of it. And then a lot of times it's Tren, usually long ester Tren, Tren E, Parabolin, those sorts of things. Some of them will use acetate, but again, there's some top guys that are using grams of Tren. That's not fun when you're using acetate. So
Dean, I'm sure you've been around those 1 gram guys.
And then I've seen certain guys who have consulted with me who are taking like metal Trenbolone, 3 to 5 milligrams, and you're just going, wow, how the tolerance is there from a prep perspective with everything else. Like one cycle was basically Tren, Ment, and metal Trenbolone, and I'm just there scratching my head looking at it going, I would not like to be training around this person in the gym, because their fire would be pretty well lit.
Well, the other one,
do you think this is these high dose cycles is the reason why we see so much coach hopping and so much sponsorship hopping and so many like silent blowouts? Where, I mean, recently Milos has been getting a lot of slack, but Milos is not on grams of gear. You know, he's on TRT at most, but some of his clients just bounce. So I'm always wondering, like, are these the protocols, or is there just something going on elsewhere, you know, neurologically, where people just move around all the time and just go from team to team, whoever wants to support them?
I mean, with Samson,
I heard AJ's frustration as well, right? And I've gone through these processes as well, where you get guys absolutely diced to the socks, right? You compromise their health a little bit, but they win, right? This is the risk that they're willing to undertake. They win a world championships or a pro show, whatever. They compromise their health. The cycle was heavy. You tell them to come off. But neurologically, there's something going on. And then it's the coach's fault, right? And then, of course, the coach gives everything. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to stop coaching after so many years. Because, you know, you give everything to the client, try to keep them healthy, but also try to keep them in the winning circle. And then when shit hits the fan for whatever small reason, right? They overdid the diuretics and then they're flat and you can't bring them back, then it's your fault, even though you were not there with them in the hotel room where they're panicking. And if you were there holding their hand through the process, as soon as you leave, you basically have to flush the diuretics down the toilet, right? Because they start scrolling and they see the competitors. And they're like, oh shit, this guy's diced. Well, he's using a filter. What do you think? You know?
Well, sorry.
No, I was going to say that's, you know, even part of the safe, like the model discussion we were having was, you know, one of the very first things I brought to social media, or even like when I was educating on that forum, was you've got TRT and you've got your cycle. Blasting and cruising should not entertain into your thought process, because you need to have that period of physiological level in order for your health to come back. And that TRT has to be strict. Like mentally, you have to accept, I'm going to lose tissue, I'm going to deflate because of the receptors aren't being activated to hold that tissue from multiple different pathways. But like you said, neurologically, their brain is at such a high dopamine threshold that is it their brain subconsciously saying, don't do it. You're going to suffer this sort of dopamine deficit. And you do see guys then who do drop down from outrageous AAS use to TRT, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, life is absolutely shit. I've got, you know, low drive, no libido, and you're sort of like going, well, it's your brain that's trying to look for that high dopamine from the cycle that you've done. You just have to accept that your brain hasn't got the plasticity to instantly drop down to where it is now at that normal level, but your kidneys, your heart, your liver, everything else will thank you for dropping to that physiological dose.
It's probably where the worst decisions are made, right? When you're in the last couple of weeks for contest prep and then the last couple of weeks after contest prep. That's why so many guys start buying cars and shoes the last 4 weeks. And then the 4 weeks after the show, it's like a hormonal roller coaster, basically the last ride of the roller coaster, right, where you're just pulling in. But it's just the high is gone. You're like, everything's so boring now. And I'm going to be honest, like I was off gear for a year, right? And still running HCG monotherapy. My testosterone levels were great. My fertility parameters were great. It just doesn't feel the same. And that's a whole year optimizing my neurotransmitters with 5-HTP and L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine and all that stuff. It's still not, after a year, I was kind of sick of it, to be honest. It's like, man, I can't wait to get back on TRT and get my brain function back. So I don't think it ever comes back. So coming back to physiological levels of testosterone is absolutely a good idea, or maybe even ATG monotherapy, but coming off completely after so many years. Oh man, you turn into a sissy.
Yeah.
That's
Better
one
boy.
of the biggest lessons that, I deliver in consults to guys that are thinking of doing AAS or doing, their own private TRT, is that once you do this long term, well enough, at 12 to 16 weeks to dip your toes in the water. But once you go long term, like 1+2 years, your brain chemistry will not really return to where it was before. No. Or it will, but it just will. You'll have this comparison syndrome of how you were before. And, we all make the analogy. It's like getting a Ferrari on loan and you're driving the Ferrari around, and then at the end, it's like you have to hand back in the keys and you're going back to your own car. And you could have a decent car like a BMW or whatever, but it's never going to have the same thrill as the Ferrari. And you're always going to think, what if, or how it was driving the Ferrari, that you're drawn in. And I think not from a physical dependence perspective, but I would anticipate testosterone and AAS will get reclassified as, psychoactive dependent drugs in terms of like dependence at some point when we start to realize how the brain chemistry changes long term in people. That I see it. I've helped countless pros when they retire through PCT, and I'd say about a good 60-70% of them end up back on TRT again, because one, obviously their epigenetics have changed, so their lipid metabolism gets all skewed because of the low hormone level, even though it looks good on bloods. And their neurochemistry is starting to suffer, where they just don't give a F about things. They've no libido. So that's someone who's, chronically used during their career, that they're left with a choice of either stay off and live that blunted response, or change the dial a little bit to a more potentially optimal level versus where they sat for, 10 or 15 years of their career. So that's a big consideration that, regardless of safe use in the moment, no one wants to end up with neurodegenerative disease when they're in their 50s and 60s post-use of these things.
No, I agree. There's a great study by Timothy Pietkowski and some of his cohorts. I'll share it here. This I just made a reaction video on, so I'll share my screen. Let's see, at the stage. Here. I go back to it every fucking time, the normalization of problematic Trenbolone use in online anabolic androgenic steroid communities. Now, I just made a reaction video to the study. It's fresh off the press. This is from, May 14th, 2024. So it's only a week old. And here they mention that a lot of guys, they basically always go back to Tren, myself included, because it works so well. But there's also sort of addiction behavior with illicit substances, especially with performance-enhancing drugs, that people just can't let it go. And it's unclear if that's from neurotransmission changes that occur when you run Tren or other steroids, that you just want to go back to it. Like, there seems to be some sort of addictive behavior associated with steroids. And I think this is one of the first couple of studies that is going to show that over the next couple of years. Because it is getting more problematic. And it's weird that it seems that a lot of people actually want to go into that behavior before they even start. Because the fascination and aromatization of these kinds of content, I mean, even due to podcasts like this, where we talk about it openly, it gets more and more and more out there. And people want to know what the fuss is about and think they can handle it. And this study also discusses that Tren users, like there's two classes of Tren users, right? The novices and the experienced. And novices, they will experience all the side effects. Mm-hmm. And the masters of Trenbolone, they don't experience any side effects, or they got it completely under control. They don't get any mental changes or bronchoconstriction or that kind of stuff, and they run 700 milligrams. So and it's the same with drug addiction, right? Yep. I'm not an addict. I got it under control. So I would advise everybody to watch that video and read that study. It's very, very interesting because it will give you some introspection on what is going on in our community.
Yeah. I get a lot of lifestyle guys that were former alcoholics or former drug addicts that have switched over to this stuff, even if it's TRT. There's definitely an addictive component there. And with the Trenbolone, sorry, I was just going to say with the Trenbolone thing, because I've experienced that myself. I mean, the first time I used it, I think you also chase a feeling, right? The first time you use Trenbolone, you expect I don't know if you expect a response because you've heard about it, or if it's doing something in your brain immediately. So you're seeking something out, but you'll titrate the dose up until you get that response, right? So very few people the first time using Tren use a very tiny amount. I feel like it starts to creep, and then you have a horrible experience. Like I remember yelling at my wife in prep, really embarrassing, right? Like some of those things you remember, and you're like, it just gives you a horrible. You're like, what was I doing? But you can use it.
I will tell you, 25 milligrams a week, you get that response also.
Wow.
100%.
Wow.
And I'm a fucking animal in the gym. It's insane. I'm having so much fun. But I also notice it, at home, like the irritability is there. But it's minute. But I'm in tune with my body and I know where it's coming from, right? So I'm stopping the train this week after 6 weeks on 25 milligrams. So most guys would run 150 milligrams in a week. And I took 6 weeks, but I still noticed it.
How did you dose it? How are you dosing the 25, if you don't mind me asking?
Sub-Q, micro.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mix half an amp of test, Bayer Testosterone, that's about 156 milligrams because they're overfilled, and then 0.25 milliliters Tren acetate. But I just preload like 2 weeks worth. So I do 1 amp of test and 0.5 milliliter Tren acetate to shake that up. Cool. Turns nice and yellow, and then I draw with an insulin syringe 0.17 IUs or milliliters on the insulin syringe. And so I do that sub-Q every day, and I still get minor bronchoconstriction. But again, I'm in tune with my body. I think a normal guy would not notice these kinds of things. But since I have so much experience, I can tell like, oh yeah, Tren is definitely working. Right? And it was a worthy experiment. Because people say that they can run Trenbolone without any side effects. But if you get side effects at 25 milligrams a week, imagine what 1,000 milligrams does.
Yeah. They're just unaware of, right? And that was something I always noticed about Tren, like when I initially used it, was you could almost hear yourself saying these horrible things, right? Like you're almost removed from your body. Like I could hear myself talking, and it's only to the people that you care about, right? Like I could go to you could call a random friend up and be totally cool, right? But then you come home to your wife and you're a total moron.
Total.
It's like you have no control, but you can hear yourself saying these horrible things, and there's like no filter. It's completely gone.
Yeah, that's why coaching these kinds of athletes is so difficult sometimes. And telling somebody to get off the Tren when they're on a gram of Tren or 700 or 350 or even, and they come to you, they have this horrible blood work. You tell them, so it's time to get off Tren. They don't want to do it.
Nope.
And that's the addiction. That's the dopaminergic signaling. It's hilarious to see when you're distanced from it. It's like, oh, here we go again, right? This guy just paid like an arm and a leg for a consultation, and I'm going to give him the same advice, and he's not going to follow it, and then he's going to go to the next guy and pay a consultation there until he gets what he wants. 100% addiction, dude. So these researchers, give this study a read. All the citations for this podcast will be down below. This one will be, you'll recognize yourself if you've used Tren in the past.
And I think like the underlying like biology too, we could discuss this on another podcast, is your neurons have what's called like a gated voltage. And I've spoke about this before. And for your nerve to fire, it has to reach this excitation potential voltage. The more it works two ways. You either have a bunch of neurotransmitter that excites the nerve, and the nerve then fires, and obviously then dopamine crosses across the synapse to your side, or you get really sort of ramped up like with the likes of androgens with intracellular signaling that affects calcium, and now the polarization of the membrane changes, so again to make it more excitable. When you stop using these things, those gated voltages of the nerves are sitting so high. That's where you get that like blunted feeling when you come back down, because that signaling to the nerve is not hitting the excitation potential. And that's one of the big problems of probably, even when you come off, Steve, of the nerve's threshold. We don't even have a quantifiable time limit on when that threshold falls back to how it should be. And that's where then you get guys, entertaining dodgy practices when they have that low dopamine or falling into like porn addiction to try and get their dopamine level really high in order to get sexually excited. And then all of a sudden they've no libido towards their partner, but they can easily get excitable towards porn. And then that spirals where, one type doesn't fulfill it. And that, that chronically then leads to issues with dopamine long term that you have to really realize when you start messing with these androgens or part of your lifestyle. You have to be aware that you've got no quantifiable way of ever figuring out where your nerve threshold is sitting. So you can't say, oh, now it's at 900 millivolts, now it's at 700. You can't measure that voltage. So when someone says, oh, when's my brain going to be normal again after using AAS or TRT? It's like, how long is a piece of string?
Yeah. No. So basically, based on this, you would say that harm mitigation and not taking any risks would just be TRT then.
Even then, when you view like TRT, how is that changing a person's epigenetics versus where they sat naturally is the other side to it.
No, but if you, let's say your testosterone levels were low and you bring that to the top of the reference range, which might be higher than you had during puberty. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think there's much risk there. But then as long as you start stacking to TRT plus, HRT plus, and then throwing in, the goodies, the Primo and the Masteron and low dose Tren on top, I think then you're already away from safer practices.
You're well away from it.
And how many guys actually stay on that TRT?
Yeah, so to be clear, like I'm on 150 tests, 70 Anavar, and 25 Tren. So that's already not safe. Right? And that's less than 300 milligrams a week. And I agree. I would agree because I just did my blood work before and after, and things have not gotten any better besides my lipoprotein LA, because of course testosterone and ezetimibe does lower that. So I did put in the ezetimibe, preventatively, because I know based on my previous blood work results that lipids just change. So yeah, my lipoprotein A and ApoE-B improved, but everything else skewed, right? Creatine phosphokinase, creatinine, lactose dehydrogenase, liver enzymes all went up. Yeah, and that's in a low and effective dose of less than 300 milligrams a week. So I don't think that there's harm and risk mitigation models. I think there's only risk acceptance.
Yeah, I've done a tongue-in-cheek post before saying what's the safest way to do it, and the next slide was just don't do them. And it's sort of like, well, people are still going to do them. We're like, well, that's the point. The point is to be sarcastic that, there is no safe way or risk reduction. You have to have that responsible, like you said, acceptance that things we're all adults. We all make our own responsible decisions. We all get in our cars every day to drive somewhere. We're all making a responsible decision to drive correctly and drive with our seatbelts on and this, that, and the other. That
speak for yourself. I drive in Thailand on a motorbike with no seatbelt.
That we all make risk decisions every day, and whether we accept that risk or not, when it comes to these things, I just don't like. Even when it comes to like female androgen use, is another can of worms of where you have safe female use, where in my view,
Victoria Felkar on, she'll have some word for us.
There's not even okay, yeah, maybe risk acceptance if that female wants to accept the risks, but the risks are much, much higher. That I'd take a guess and say probably 8 out of 10 women haven't been fully informed consent-wise surrounding 100%. what they're getting into. I
think 9.9.
Yeah, I was being nice there, but they really don't have, like with males, the consented, risk-informed decision to use it isn't as complex as to speak as a female's physiology.
Yeah.
Okay, you say to a man, like, okay, your lipids might get skewed, so your heart disease risk goes up. Your creatinine and blood pressure might change, so your kidneys might be at risk. Your liver metabolism may change. These are all like health-conscious decisions that yeah, okay, maybe you might be able to mitigate a bit with lifestyle and nutrition and whatever else. Comes to the female side, it's sort of like, well, we're going to put in a high amount of androgens that you've never biologically developed to have. Good luck and where they're going to go and what effect they're going to have. Because again, you can still say, oh, heart disease risk, kidney risks, liver disease, but now you've got like the androgenic sides of them once female physiology changes post-use. That's another kind of worms of how do you pick up the pieces there when there's irreversible damage done to the female physiology reproductively.
You know what makes it even worse? These studies that say that there's no virilization on 300 milligrams mastestrone per week. All funded by Syntex, baby.
Yeah. And what was the max? I don't remember off the top of my head. What was the FDA actual?
2,800 milligrams oral drostanolone per day per week.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. No virilization.
No, none. Safe, very safe.
Same with the Anavar studies. No virilization.
None.
And of course, later on, they do recognize virilization when they use that in Turner syndrome or Klinefelter, something like that. Of course, in what's Klinefelter is for men, right? Turner is for women, if I remember correctly. So they do recognize that there's some virilizing or androgenic effects in these kids then when they go through puberty later in life. But that's only in retrospective studies. So this is why sometimes I feel the scientific evidence is severely lacking and a little bit biased towards the medication and not the patient. And that makes the decision-making process even harder, especially for women, because the effects of androgens on the reproductive tract, the ovaries and stuff, good luck finding it, man. Good luck.
No, and a lot of those studies were removed. If you've ever seen the original Nandrolone stuff that they were doing, right? We talked about the original Trenbolone. I mean, there's a reason why they've been removed.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope those ever surface, though. I would love to read them.
Oh, we can.
I can't remember exactly, but I have it on Instagram. The amount of molecule differences between 0.5 milligram of testosterone that a female makes roughly per day versus how many molecules are in 10 milligrams of Anavar per day.
Oh yeah,
it's in like the billions. I'm gonna pull it up here. It's just like when you look at it, you're like, wow, 10 milligrams. You think 10 milligrams is safe? This is
that's the
number.
nerdy stuff, though. Like I made several videos about the Avogadro's constant and the molar masses of steroids, and that goes way over people's heads. Because if you start discounting for the ester and the difference in molecular weight, you might get like. Let's do test and primo in a 1-to-1 ratio, right? And you go testosterone propionate, methylone inositol. You might get like 30% more testosterone. So it's not in a 1-to-1 ratio. Why is my estrogen on a range? so these kinds of things. All right, I propose a little pee break, and then we should go over to the next subject.
I'll pull up that thing on Instagram. I'm not even sure how to pronounce this number.
Avogadro's constant? You mean?
No. This this Instagram post of how many molecules are in 10 milligrams of Anavar versus 10 milligrams of testosterone.
Oh, that post is from a while ago. I remember that.
It is.
That's a great post, though.
That's a Googleplex.
I think it's like 10 quintillion or something. I'm not even sure of. Once you go beyond.
I think it's quintillion. Yeah, because for like 10 or 20 milligrams, I remember using the quintillion amount as well.
That's like, Steve, in your video you did years ago on the Primo versus Masteron. One of your first ones when you did that.
Yeah, one of the first making the comparison videos.
Which is funny because looking back at it, you specifically said at the end, you're like, who would want to run a Primo only cycle? And he said, I would. And then he said, who would run a Masteron only cycle? You're like, I wouldn't. And now years later, right? It's like, look where we've come. You were right. You were right all along.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
not Primo
speculating a little. No, you throw it out there, and now we become to realize that some things are just bullshit. Right? There's a nandrolone only cycle that works. Tresolone has actually been investigated as a standalone therapy, and it does work. And then plenty of guys who run tresolone only, and they get great response. 50 milligrams to 150 milligrams a week, and that's their TRT. They want to reinvent the wheel because they get adverse effects from testosterone only. And then there's testosterone only, And there's even guys running Trenbolone or Boldenone only, but Masteron only. Come on now.
Boldenone only.
Yeah. Welcome to Europe.
Wow. How does sexual function? How does sexual function work on that?
Well, it's like the last month of contest prep.
Okay, that's different. There's no sexual function at that point.
No. Nobody cares. They only care about cake at that point. So we can proceed with either switching the topic entirely, going to the diminishing returns, or we can just keep on the same pace and discuss if steroids education has made a difference and if evidence-based bodybuilding pharmacology is bullshit. Maybe we just continue with that.
Yeah.
And then save the diminishing returns and the binding proteins for the next episode.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So to switch topics, I want to ask you guys, right? We're all on YouTube sharing, risk mitigation and risk acceptance protocols. I want to know, has a decade of public steroid education made any difference, or did it just make things worse? Because it seems to me that things are just getting worse before they're getting better.
Yeah,
I would say worse.
I was about to be very polite and say drastically worse. If anything, it's made it more accessible of people putting up on TikTok or Instagram, this is what I'm taking. Like what I shared in our group, like the social media post, here's what I'm taking, my blood work is perfectly healthy. And all they showed was their total testosterone and their SHBG in the gutter. And it's like, oh, I'm massively healthy. And it's like, well, where's your lipid panel? That's probably in the trash. Where's your liver enzymes? It's all well and good with this glorification of people being transparent and saying, this is what is happening or what I'm doing. I'm quote unquote healthy. Even from my own perspective, and we joked about it earlier, for, transparency of being like an educator, I'll use like coded symbols to give people an insight into what's going on. You get these DMs of like, oh, what's a pineapple? What's a tomato? And it's sort of like T is for tomato, P is for pineapple, and then I'll put the banana. I'll put the banana in. The banana is like, what the hell is a banana?
Just Boldenone, of course.
And then it's like Boldenone. I'm like, I wouldn't touch it, to be honest, from my point of view. And then you're like, it's a nana for N, and they're like, oh, and now they're making sense of the whole code. But that is really because if you have a code, if you have young followers. The ones that have a bit of sense and have been around and have done their research can basically attest what T for tomato is or P for pineapple. But if it's someone young and they're looking at it, you're like, oh, is that how much fruit you're eating? And you're like, yes, it is. And you're like, you're not protecting them, but you're still being transparent, but you're not openly saying, well, this is quote unquote safe because this is what I do personally. And you're still being transparent to your followers of allowing them to see what you're doing, but you're protecting not vulnerable, but ones that may not, I guess, have the risk aversion sense to see what's being done and then go, well, if he's doing it, I'm going to mirror what he's doing. And we've seen that, throughout the ages of influence on social media where people follow what others are doing just because everyone likes to copy or he's doing it, therefore it's safe. And I'd never want to be, held in that regard.
So Kurt, I know that you specifically don't mention any dosages. You've done that from the start, right?
I try.
Like, what is your? Well, I try. What is your reasoning behind it?
I don't think it's safe to really recommend these things, and there's a different tolerance, right? And what you might need might be totally different from what I need, and it doesn't. I think, and at the pro level, I think a lot of them shy away from it because it takes away from their work ethic and their genetics, what they're eating. Yeah. I mean, some of these guys, the guy I was talking about before, he's doing 6 or 7 grams a year. I mean, that man eats. I mean, we're eating 8,000 to 9,000 calories a day. The guy trains like an animal. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this stuff. He lives and breathes this stuff, right? His sleep is monitored. Everything is monitored. So it's not just a function of the milligrams that he's using. And he has the best genetics in the world. So I just think from an ethical point of view, some of that Rick Collins says, he's like similar to what Dean pointed out. He goes, you tell people this is what you've heard people use. You don't ever say use this or use that because you're really setting yourself up for disaster if that's your coaching.
Yeah, so I'm the guy that says exactly that. Use this, use that, but also consider this and that. And it's the problem with that is of course you never know who you're talking to, right? Your audience could be highly intellectual or kids, like Dean said. What I think that my YouTube channel has accomplished is that at the higher level, from the amateur to the IFBB pro level, people are off better with this kinds of information. But maybe at the lower level, the younger level, they're off worse because they lack the experience. They might feel incentivized to experiment things that I'm doing or what people are doing that I bring on this YouTube channel. They might think that they know by watching my videos, but that's only disseminated downwards in a 20-minute, 30-minute video, which is already too long for most people, based on days, weeks, months of research. Right? That Trenbolone video took me months to prepare for. Right? And the Nandrolone video I'm preparing now already for 4 weeks, and I'm still not done, because it will be the best Nandrolone video on the YouTubes once it's ready. So you might watch one of my videos and then think but going through the citations and actually reading and then having the experience, right? And then people listen selectively. So if I say do this, do that, but also pay attention to these blood work markers and do this preventatively, and again, the nutrition and the blah, 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 blah. I mean, it gets old fast, so they selectively pick and choose what they want to hear. And I'm not sure if that's my responsibility because I'm presenting the information the best I can, but I can't decide what people take away from the YouTube channel. Like when I go to the Olympia, I've been there twice now, right? And then several other IFBB pro shows here in Thailand or amateur shows. The large majority of the people that come up to me thank me for the information that I provide, and especially the younger kids. And this is just 100% of the younger kids, like 16 to 18 to 20. They say the exact same thing. I thought I was ready, but after watching your YouTube channel, I decided not to do it.
Wow.
That's 100%. So I think that it's making a difference, but how many of those kids that decided to do something based on what they saw on my YouTube channel and other channels that didn't come up to me or don't meet me at the Olympia, that I'm not sure about. And, I think it's hard for beginners to kind of disseminate between good information and bad information. And unfortunately, the good information has smaller reaches on social media. I mean, I have one of the biggest education platforms, right? Besides Derek More Plits More Dates, but it's a little bit more reaction content now, and he doesn't post so much anymore because he's too busy. That was good information for the large majority of it. But there's so much larger YouTube channels out there with terrible information. Yeah. Just absolutely terrible. Right? Just run an Anavar only cycle. I mean, come on, dude. That's not good information, Yeah.
Something else that I consider, and I don't know how it is in England or in Thailand, but in the United States, if I cause harm, whether indirectly or directly, God forbid, by an advice, legally, I'm looked at differently, right? Like, so a judge would, education comes into that. So for instance, I'm not covered by the Good Samaritan law. So like if I perform CPR on someone in public, I'm now responsible for that person. I have to ride the ambulance with them versus if a regular person off the street just does CPR, they're just covered. They can't get sued. I can get sued, right? Because I should know better. I'm now responsible. Same with my advice. So like I have to be very careful with what I say because a judge isn't going to take the fact that I can't claim I didn't know. Like, I didn't realize that halotestin was deadly. I just told kids to take it. You know what I mean? So like that's always something I keep in the back of my mind as well. And I think just ethically, I just try to stay away from the harm stuff if I can. Right. But we all know that when coaching, there's like, especially at the pro level, there's harm that's done.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how many disclaimers you put in your email. If people feel that you did them wrong, they will sue you. Of course, that's in the Western world. Here in Thailand, it's a little bit different. Yeah. Like I am with the best lawyers, obviously, and they tell me not to worry about anything. So, and this is also one of the reasons why I'm always under an alias, because I knew that talking about performance-enhancing drugs publicly in this great of a detail, I think I'm one of the most detailed YouTube channels. Like I go very in depth, right? Besides you too, but you don't post as much as I do. And as a broad range of topics. Not yet, at least. Right? I'm waiting for you guys to pump out more content, especially you, Dean. Get busy. So I also know that I have a broad audience. And then hopefully the disclaimer and being away from the Western world where lawsuits, especially in America, where lawsuits are just, falling out of everybody's pockets. I think that should cover it a little bit. And I always emphasize that it's in the responsibility of the audience to make their best decisions. Right? Yeah. But did it get any better? I don't think so. Because I see it all around, like here in Thailand, for example. These guys, they don't speak a word of English. They don't have access to my YouTube channel. And after 18 years of being here, the drug abuse has become more rampant than it was 20 years ago. And I have nothing to do with that. Because they don't watch my YouTube channel. They know of me. I try to educate everybody in the national team on how to use them safely, and that trickles down. But then 3 steps removed from this trickling down, it's still horrendous. So I think, generally speaking, like for the beginners, it's just gotten worse because it's so easily accessible.
I think also there's a level of probably cognitive bias or cognitive dissonance of if it doesn't suit what you're seeking, you're going to seek someone who is saying what you want to hear. And it, when we've all gotten caught in the crossfire of certain tribes where what we're saying is going against what is trying to be said otherwise. And at the end of the day, I've always just come back and went, right, if that's what you want to choose to believe, that's fine. No one's sitting on top of their pedestal going, well, you're effing wrong for saying this. How we've all sort of come about it from an education perspective is, well, here's the evidence to support what we're saying. Nothing is cherry picked. It's all valid to a specific point. Sure enough, what we'll probably see if we ever do discuss science is if you look hard enough, you'll probably find a study that supports your viewpoint. So,
talking about the carnivore diet,
you can really get into the nitty gritty of like throwing scientific, I guess, citations at one another to try and argue your point. That I guess as I've gotten older, there's no point. If someone has a level of bias and that's their personal belief, you just have to meet in the middle and agree to disagree. Even looking back at what went on in the world 4 years ago, I was probably, one of the first ones on social media to point out the flaws of the research that was going to come from a pharmacology perspective. And sure enough, I was just like batting away flies that were annoying you, that you were going, I'm not going to say I'm right, but there will come a point from what I've said historically comes true, because from a scientific perspective, it just doesn't add up. And, understanding drug design and everything. And here we are 4 years later where all the answers are becoming apparent.
Yeah.
That's a clear example of someone just using scientific knowledge that might not be actually cited and in depth to what's currently going on. And then when you gather the data, you look back then historically and go, well, actually, I was right all along, because, there was the mechanisms behind what's going on. And that's... And
in case you wonder, go back to PubMed now and look at those same citations that came out 4 years ago. Retracted. So much retracted on this kinds of topics. I mean, that's, well...
Yeah.
No,
it's alarming.
You were right, Dean. I mean,
you
were definitely right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's when it comes to something science like that, and this is again where it comes down to someone's like personal belief of holding strongly. A time period like that period was quite sensitive, where you are trying to be very honest and open and accept how serious it is. And even like when we look at what we're speaking about now in terms of like even steroids, the historical data always shows the answer then. So like what we're talking about, like neurodegenerative disease, personality disorder changes. I keep saying, in 15 years time, like the public health service of the UK is going to be overwhelmed with guys who are now in their early 20s really taking the abuse, ending up in their sort of late 30s, early 40s, and that neurodegeneration has caught up with them. So now they have like borderline personality disorder, other suffering with cognitive deficits where they can't have, relatively good short-term memory, or they have schizophrenic bouts or bipolar depression. Like, all these things are more than likely where we're heading with how some things are being done. And it's the historical viewpoint when we look back and go, well, yeah, we seen this coming, but how reactive were we? I still think, like, from a education perspective, it's not lost. Like, none of us have given up. We're still here, 8, 9 years later, still saying the same message. That has hopefully continued to evolve and grow and reach, all parts of the world. But we're always going to have people on the other side of the fence that it's whether people choose to believe what we're saying versus what they're saying. And like you said, you can't get inside someone's head and make them think a certain way.
No.
You present what you believe is your best evidence for a viewpoint, and whether they accept that or not is up to them.
But sometimes I think about, like, dumbing it down a little bit so everybody has access to this kinds of information. But I always find myself purposely making it complicated. So there's a little bit of a filter that you need a certain points of IQ to understand my YouTube channel. Because otherwise, and the videos are long and lengthy and in depth, right? And I go over, I think 95% that's relevant. Sometimes I omit some stuff because it would just go into a tangent. And I think the people who are intelligent and really on top of their stuff and want to know more, they appreciate that. And the guys that have the 7-second, goldfish TikTok brain, they would just scroll ahead. And they will never learn, and they will never have access to that information because they simply can't sit through it. But I think that's the large majority of the steroid users now. It's not like before where it was hidden and you had to earn it, right? You would have to bench 3 plates and squat, 4 plates and deadlift 5 plates. Or somebody at the gym would say, hey, dude, you've been here 7 years grinding away. Maybe it's time you look into a little bit of testosterone with the Anabolic kickstart. Horrible advice, but then at least they opened the doors for you, right? So I had to earn it, and I'm sure you guys had to earn it or figure it out on your own. But now it's everywhere, and it's glorified, especially with Trenbolone and SARMs. And I think that makes it very problematic for younger kids who don't have that mature decision-making process yet. And yeah, like you said, they will mess themselves up. But the kids have been messing themselves up with SARMs 5, 7, 8, 10 years ago. And before that was pro-hormones.
Yeah.
And I knew kids in high school, like 2 or 3, that were just going into their parents' steroid jar, the big Anabols from Thailand, the pinkies, they would order 1,000 at a time. And they would just grab a handful and go to the gym. Like, they were 16. And they would just take their parents' Debo, orals. They didn't even know what it was. It was vitamins. And it would be swollen, red, and puffy, and gyno, and acne, but they would be big and strong. And where did those kids end up? Nowhere. I haven't heard from them since. They weren't even on the, when you go to school and you have like a reunion party, you weren't even there. Probably shrink to 0. And that's why they didn't want to show up. So this stuff has been going on, but I think now because of the internet and everybody talking about it publicly after Rich Piana and Boston Lloyd and guys like Dan Duchesne, just it becomes more and more public, and now everybody has access to it. So there's more people able to make horrible decisions and not willing to sit through the education that we offer because it's too complicated, dude. It's too long. It's too lengthy. Like Kurt's podcasts are at least 30 minutes. It's long, man. It's long. I wouldn't be. I could sit through it. I watch all of your stuff, but most people can't.
And I think the Dean and I at least don't do. I'm not a big confirmation bias guy, so I'm not going to just tell people what they want to hear, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't tend to make a lot of content just to make people happy. So I don't. They generally ditch out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I made a video one time about what was the best time to inject. And then I came to the conclusion that it's before fasted cardio. And the whole reason why I made that video is for people to do their fasted cardio. Yeah. So at least, hopefully somebody took something positive away from that.
Yeah, I mean, even like the nuances of like growth hormone, with most of us now viewing, something as simple.
Yeah, you ruined
as
it for me.
Yeah, we
I
grow
was doing
hormone before bed.
I was doing intramuscular injections pre-cardio, and then everybody was in my inbox. Yeah, but Steve Dean said
Yeah.
it takes like 4 hours to peak, and I'm like,
You're like sub Q, like, you know, and that's the devil in the detail of like, if you don't know that knowledge like that of doing an IM injection of growth hormone peaks within 45 minutes to 60 minutes, then you doing your growth hormone injection before cardio, or you're pinching out your belly fat to put it in, is missing the mark. So, you know, that's even like further nuance where we even see where people try and turn others against one another of, oh, well, they've said this and you're saying this. And it's sort of like, well, no, you know, that an IM injection, you know, but at the end of the day, how many people are shooting up IM GH who have the balls to do it, to speak, that they are going straight for their belly and jabbing it in, oh, let's load up probably at the least case, 25G orange into somewhere lean. You know, the insulin pen is just the easier choice and less painful.
yeah.
But
you know, and
you keep me on my toes, man.
But
Q.
Well, even crazier. I mean, even crazier with that is people that are intelligent arguing that they're doing site injections with this stuff. That's not how it works. Like, stick it in your bicep's not going to make your bicep grow. That's called inflammation.
I did this 7 years ago where I shot growth hormone an entire year pharmaceutical in my right pec because it's a little bit smaller. Didn't do anything.
Yeah. When it wouldn't.
Talking about increlex, you get fullness. Will I get side enhancement from it? I'm not entirely sure. But
who knows? Probably not.
No.
it's just like injectable BPC. Yeah, some of it acts locally, but then it diffuses into systemic circulation. So doing it locally, you're going to get a chunk of it binding in that area, but as it starts to spread out and diffuse into the bloodstream, you're actually, it's like, come back.
Well, and you only have so many receptors there, right? So like if you injected 10 units of growth hormone in your chest, like, is all 10 units going to be able to do anything there? It can't. So
no. And when you look at the vasculature, if you really look into the mechanics, I mean, it's not like it's going to diffuse into the muscle and then enter the bloodstream. No, the vasculature already takes it from a very small spot and it just goes out. Yep. So it diffuses a little bit and then it just trickles out. So, you know, like, of course, all these nuances, they matter, but I think in the big picture, as long as you get it in, it's going to work, you know?
And it's really like from an education perspective that everyone has to, aside from lunatics, everyone has to support one another in terms of like the content that's being done, the effort that has gone to create that content to educate someone has to be acknowledged rather than immediately attacking someone for what they've put out. Within reason, like I said, if there are, lunatics making crazy claims, then sure enough, they're going to be open to interpretation. But for all it's worth, like we said, with Derek putting out content in the beginning that reached hundreds of thousands of people, that it's there to educate and make the space a little more safer as opposed to just saying something for fame. I think how a lot of us have entered into this sort of, I guess, roller coaster of education is to make things safer as opposed to, I'm going to make this content to be as controversial as possible so that I get a load of followers, where your message gets completely diluted down, where people are following you for the controversy as opposed to your authority of educating people.
Well, why do you think that works for a lot of people? Because people love drama. Because I always say that there's a large majority of the people out there who are not intelligent enough to pick up on educational content because it goes over their head and it's lengthy and you need to sit down and you need to take notes and go to PubMed and then do your own deep dive, right? Go down the rabbit hole. Like I've been watching like Dr. Scott Stevenson's content since the beginning, right? Since the Intense Muscle Board. And you listen to him or you read something and you're like, shit. Well, now you got to set 2 hours aside.
Yeah.
Right? But not many people are willing to do that, So this is why controversy and reaction channels and drama does so well. Whereas true education, it's hard, right? And I mean, you got to give Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia some credit there because that's pure education. And then are they 100% correct? No. Are they correct most of the time? Yes. But then again, I'm not 100% correct all the time either. You know, I make mistakes here and there, and you come back, and it's a learning process for all of us. But it's, you know, it's funny that I think that general population takes more from Huberman and Peter Attia than the entire bodybuilding community takes from our channels. They would rather watch pros train or watch people talk shit.
Yep.
Which says a lot about the bodybuilding industry.
Yeah.
Or the fitness industry.
But so, like, again, I don't have nearly as big of a following as you do, but my biggest performing thing on Instagram is that reel with Wesley Vissers. It has 13,000 likes and 1 million views.
Because he talked about drugs?
Yeah. He's talking about mascot. But that's my point. It's like, you know, I could put something, or I put, like I said to you guys yesterday in that chat, I'll post something about why we methylate oral steroids, and I'll use a picture of Anadrol, and everyone will just dwell on Anadrol. They don't even read the post. They just look at the pretty picture of the Anadrol. They're like, oh, I did Anadrol once. It's like, it's not even about Anadrol.
No. Yeah, it's a shame. But not everybody has a passion for this kind of nerdy stuff like we do, you know? That's why it's good that we're doing this podcast together. Because it's far and few between, man. People that really, and the weird thing is, like, there are people out there because they send me studies and they contribute to videos that I make, but they're all hidden away. Yeah, kind of like Dean. No. Dean being hidden away. Dean needs to get more on social media.
Well, and like I've told you guys before, like most of the people that are doing what I'm doing are not. You would never see them in the public eye, nor do they have any interest in this stuff, and they don't have any. The difference is we all can apply it to bodybuilding too. Like I explained to a bunch of chemists and engineers at Merck that we use Trenbolone, and they thought I was nuts. They're like, why would you ever take that? And I was like, it was a human grade drug first. They're like, no way. No way was that human grade. Why would you ever? Because that's what we do, because we're crazy. They just
It's weird because I went through all the animal studies and there's nothing there about liver enzymes or lipids or, you know, metabolic changes. It's all just, does it grow tissue? Yes, it does. Trenbolone is an endocrine disruptor, by the way, environmental endocrine disruptor. So when people are working about PCBs and heavy metals and plastics from or whatever is in the containers, right? Trenbolone is on that list.
Yeah.
It's an environmental pollutant. It's so much use of it. Like most of the Tren is being used by the cattle ranches. But apparently it's also good for emissions because you get to produce more meat for less methane production.
And they use less water. They eat less grass.
Yeah, but funded by the cattle ranches of California. So take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Last topic I want to handle for this podcast is evidence-based bodybuilding pharmacology bullshit.
It probably depends on who it's coming from.
Yeah.
If the last science class you took was earth science in the 9th grade, then you probably shouldn't be delving into pharmacology. But that's unfortunately most of it, right? I think Dean and I have experienced a ton of this recently with androgen receptor stuff, right? Arguing with people with no education on this topic. And that doesn't mean that they don't have an opinion and it's not valid, right? They might have more years working with bodybuilders or stuff, but the problem is we see this stuff at a different level.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's weird because I just did a deep dive on the androgen receptors, and I guess we'll discuss this in a month from now because we had so many more topics about drug metabolism and why steroids might stop working after a certain time. So we'll go into myostatin, androgen receptors, and SHBG and that kind of stuff. But it's weird, like the scientific evidence is clearly there that androgen receptors, do upregulate in the presence of steroids, and they might fall back down to baseline after a while, like we discussed this with Dean. But what I see is like the decision-making process on why to use certain steroids and why not to use certain steroids is based on scientific evidence that has not been duplicated amongst the various steroids. So again, the Boldenone studies, Boldenone has been extensively studied regarding kidney toxicity. And the conclusions and the animal models and the human observational studies is that it's largely due to oxidative stress and the absence of estradiol. Now, we can mitigate that, right? We can mitigate the oxidative stress and we can mitigate the absence of estradiol by taking a fucking testosterone base. good luck finding those studies being performed on Trenbolone or Primobolan or Masteron or other steroids. Not even testosterone hasn't been examined to that extent. And what I see in the scientific community is they get one new paper and they find something interesting, like Trenbolone being carcinogenic, for example, and then they want to duplicate because it's safe. They can get funding to try this again. So you have 12 studies on Trenbolone's carcinogenicity, being a carcinogen, and then nothing of the sorts on Primobolan. So saying that a particular steroid is safer than the other ones, even though the same studies have not been duplicated, is fucking asinine to me. Because I don't think any of the steroids are safe. I think if you all run them through the same parameters of analysis, right? Check them for heart enlargement, check them for kidney toxicity, check them for liver toxicity, neurotoxicity. I mean, Winstrol, Nandrolone, Trenbolone, and testosterone has been checked for neurotoxicity. That's it. So we can't say that Primobolan or Masteron are not neurotoxic because those studies have not been performed.
And never will be.
No, because it's unethical.
Primo might be. In the United States, there's currently 6 pharmaceutical companies that are producing Primobolan now. Why? I don't know. So that's part of the reason why I had the instructions as the different methods.
Send me those links so I can invest in their stock.
Sure, I will.
Yeah, because I have a lot of Bayer stock.
It's not any of the larger companies that you would think. They're smaller than Sigma. But so something interesting is going on with Primobolan. I don't know what.
Yeah, maybe it's a breast cancer medication.
Who knows?
The weird thing is Primobolan has the same efficacy as Masteron as breast cancer.
So who knows? But it could be something cool.
So this is why I always, I'm going through all of those steroid studies, right? And you guys have been doing a killer job researching the steroids more than, and I think us three have researched steroids the most besides the guys that actually wrote a book about it, right? There's a couple steroid books out there, and some of them are better than others. But even then, I think among us three, we've probably researched the most steroid studies out of anybody, or a combination of all three. And I can tell you firsthand that it's just severely lacking. Besides testosterone and nandrolone, it's severely lacking. And people pop Trenbolone like candy, and there's 0 human studies.
Well,
Zero.
even within testosterone, we don't know the pharmacokinetics of testosterone cypionate. We just base it on an anthate because we don't study it. So we use an anthate in studies because it's more predictable as an ester and it's easier to produce. So cypionate, if anyone's ever brewed, you know that as soon as it gets hot, you have to remove it from temperature. So if you're making batches for a study, it becomes very tenuous to kind of get it accurate. That's why you see a lot of, even the pharma stuff that's cypionate in the United States, you'll see pharmaceutical stuff that's dosed incorrectly because it was produced wrong.
That's why sometimes when they do third-party testing, the cypionate is only 170 milligrams.
Yeah, so as soon as ribbons appear, when it's heated, as soon as ribbons appear, you have to take it off the heat. Otherwise, it's junk. Where an anthate much more predictable.
Yeah. I've said it before from a chemistry perspective in 3D, that cyclopentane ring on cypionate, when you look at, PD7, which removes the ester, probably some of the thing that causes post-injection pain for cypionate versus an anti. It's always cypionate. When people have post-injection pain, tends to be, I don't get on well with cypionate. It's probably the affinity of that PD7B enzyme taking that big, bulky cyclopentane ring away from the testosterone, as opposed to just testosterone and anti is a 5-chain carbon that's very flexible and moves in space very well. That cyclopentane ring is very rigid in space. And it's probably, some of the post-injection pain is the drug itself crystallizing inside the tissue and causing local irritation.
Which is funny because one of the original reasons why they chose cypionate for an ester in the United States was because it was supposed to reduce PIP from an anthate. I guess certain people are more prone to it. And so, Upjohn or whoever did cypionate first was like, let's try this.
And I think parabolan, the hexahydrobenzocarbonate, is also a similar structure in phenylpropionate, right?
Yeah, and we don't know, and no one knows the pharmacokinetics. It's when guys will make up things about MPP, they're like, well, it has a half-life of, does it? How do you know that? It's never been studied. And same with parabolan. All Negma cared about was figuring out how to get 50 milligrams of API. They didn't care about anything else. And then they estimated everything else, how to dose it, when to dose it, right? Like the
Right.
stuff that you're looking at, that was done after the fact. The chemists were only given a job to get, how do you get this exact dose? Then they work
Yeah,
backwards.
that's why it's 76 milligrams per
Yeah,
ampule.
but
Oh,
they
that's
did-
the magic formula. No, they wanted 50 milligrams API.
That's all they cared about.
Yeah. And the weird thing is like the dosing protocol for Parabolin based on the insert, which we only have one page. The other side of the page I was never able to find. Again, the dosing protocol is 1 injection per week for the first 3 weeks and then 1 per month.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's
It's a
basically
longer.
20.
Yeah, it's longer
Yeah.
than an anthate. We know that, but
Yeah.
how much
No, I
longer?
think
we don't
I think the half-life was estimated around 8 days.
know. Okay.
I did find it somewhere, but is that a study or just taken from some publication?
I think it's taken from a publication because the pentane with the oxygen, I think it's going to change it entirely. I don't know if 8 days is
Yeah.
accurate. Do you know anything?
I don't. I've never seen anything published from crude reading. Like Steve said, I would always put like hexacarbamylate, the parabolin ester, to be about 8 to 10 days.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
we don't have any strict rule of thumb to it. Similarly with phenylpropionate, making it an estimate based off a propionate ester, and then
But
you've
that's
got
not-
a phenyl group attached. You're looking at maybe 3 to 5 days if you're going to take the phenyl ring that's not phenyl ring, the cyclopentane ring that's on cypionate with obviously a 2-carbon chain versus a 2-carbon chain with a phenyl group. It's probably going to fall somewhere close to cypionate in terms of half-life. And the
So
ester being removed.
So based on all of the research that you guys have done, right, which anabolic androgenic steroids would you consider have been well investigated? Like, I feel it's testosterone and androlone,
Yep.
and maybe Anavar.
Anavar is that.
Anavar's misunderstood, I think, but it's been well
Yeah.
studied. Anadrol, we don't know that much about. Right? It's still FDA
Yeah.
approved. We don't know that much about it. I think Anavar is just misunderstood when the studies, again, people are reading the abstracts. Like I did a video on the weight loss thing, right? They were using that in obese men, and they were using it versus testosterone and anthate given once every 2 weeks. So clearly,
Yeah, so the dosing
clearly the
protocols and
dosing is not correct.
pharmacodynamics. Yeah.
And then the
true.
study was aborted because the liver enzymes got skewed. So then they switched to nandrolone, and then they got fatter. So it doesn't.
But it's water retention. Right? Yeah. Yeah, so that kind of brings me again to the safer use practices or risk tolerance, is that there's really not much you can choose from if you want to stay safe. And even with nandrolone, I mean, from 25 milligrams, 50 milligrams onwards, people already start to experience side effects. You know?
Not
And I really did my absolute best to find everything about primobolan, and I came to the conclusion this is poorly investigated. So my triforce of steroids has always been testosterone, primobolan, and Anavar, but based on the scientific literature, there's not much on primo, man.
Yeah. Growth hormone.
Growth hormone. Right.
I mean, I
Yeah,
would say
yeah.
the safest thing that I would say would be testosterone and growth hormone, right? They're endogenous. You kind of at least can predict them as long as you're using a regular dose, right? Again, are you taking HIV studies and trying to translate into what we should do?
Yeah,
Right? Like
that's
when
hard.
I used a bottle of Serostim a day, I followed the HIV protocol. My weight shot up
you talked about dosages.
massively.
We got it out of you.
Well, got nothing. I got, I just, most of it was water.
Oh,
Then you
yeah.
peed it out.
From the, yeah.
I mean,
You didn't respond like Chase Irons did.
his might be fluid as well.
Yeah. He's a big boy.
No,
though.
my
I
scale
saw it.
weight went up. I was going for a while, 2 weeks straight. I was like a kilogram a day. It was unreal. And I had to eat. Paul and I were like tracking my food. We were trying to see what I could tolerate without getting fat. I was eating a gallon of ice cream a night before bed on purpose, just to see what would make me get fat. And I could not get fat.
Was it Ben and Jerry's, just like Rich Piana recommended?
No, it was some store brand garbage. I spent all my money on the Serostim. I couldn't do the Ben and Jerry's.
Yeah, a bottle a day, man. You can put your kids through college.
Yeah, the retail's $5,000 a box. That's 4 boxes a month. That's $280,000 US dollars.
But you didn't pay retail, let's be honest.
I did not pay retail. No, I did not go to CVS and buy it over the counter.
That would have been crazy.
No.
Yeah, so to kind of close that off with the for evidence-based like steroid selection, I think that most people would be if they really do the research, they'd be appalled by what they find. Like, I was, and I still have to do Winstrol and Anadrol and Nandrolone fully, and a couple other ones, Proviron, for example. Like if you do the research, you see that Proviron and Halotestin was used as fertility medications, for fuck's sake. And that there's like 50 studies on Proviron and 30 studies on Halotestin as a fertility medication, and it was prescribed.
Yeah.
You know, I think the total was like 500 live births.
Yeah.
On these kinds of medications.
And look at the years. When was it studied? Like 75 to 79, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a different era in research.
So if you want to be evidence based, you can say that you're going to run Halotestin, and it's a great fertility medication, and not mention that the time machine is, that things do change over time.
And because of that, the recent thing with Halotestin, so I talked to some of the labs in China that produce some of these raws. The sales of Halotestin quadrupled in 3 months. So they sold 4 times as much Halotestin raw after those videos than they had sold. Yep.
Should have bought some stock, man.
In Halotestin, yeah.
Because I remember when I started talking about Primo publicly, I did buy Bayer stock, and it went up, I'm sure, quite a bit. But when I started talking about liraglutide and dulaglutide and semaglutide, I also bought Novo Nordisk stock, and that went up even more. And when I started talking about tirzepatide or semaglutide is Eli Lilly, I think, I also bought Eli Lilly stock. So maybe I'm financially incentivized to. No, I am.
Well, Chase and I talked about Ceristim once, and it doubled the black market price.
Yeah, that's what I heard. And this is why Primo is so expensive. That's my fault.
Yeah,
it's $36 per ampule now. That's
really?
My fault and mine and Paul's, because we keep hyping it.
In Primobolan's defense, though, it is fragile. It is hard to make. It's similar to Tesipinate, where it does get destroyed. But again, if you're buying the raw from China, what is it? It's about $2 a bottle.
I get my Bayer Rimabolan.
No, I'm just saying.
I'm a brand snob. So
Bayer's it probably costs Bayer 30 cents to make an amp.
Yeah, and the ampules in Turkey are like $1 or $2 each. Yeah. But the black market, it's gone from $12 to $36. In some sources, you can still get it from $25. But that's the downside of talking about steroids publicly. The price goes up.
Yep.
Yeah, so maybe we should all go underground again and go to Intense Muscle and just talk about it there.
Maybe that's what we're all doing anyway.
yeah. Hey, any parting words? We've been going on for 2 hours for this episode.
On this note you said before about a book, so I actually am writing an Anabolics book that should hopefully be bigger than Llewellyn's stuff. Just taking me.
Are you taking all my citations from the videos?
I'm taking everything you say word for word. That's what I'm doing.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
I just have AI rewriting your stuff.
At least give me a credit, like in the bottom somewhere. Yeah, I learned this shit from Vigorous Steve.
Well, that'll be useful when I finally get mine done then to slot in. But mine is sort of taken how I sort of came about with the functional medicine side of the health detriments, and actually like trying to make people realize surrounding like the root cause mechanisms of why heart disease develops with AAS, and potential strategies of getting not safer, but understanding some of that risk reduction if you accept that risk as a responsible decision, like what we talked about in the podcast. So, but that's just taken me forever to try and fit into. I'll sit and write for 25 minutes, and that's all I have time some days to spend on.
Yeah.
But we'll get there.
You'll get there. But Kurt, you already have an ebook out, right?
I do.
The Growth Hormone ebook.
One. Yep. That's available on my website.
We'll link that. Link that down below. Dean, you got a whole SN education platform where people can talk about or learn all your private, seminars or
they're just like
slides and stuff.
They're like lectures, basically, of just, like what you've done with basic steroid profiles, just somewhere that someone can come into like a structured learning environment. And then, I've got another team of guys that are educators on female health, rehab, training. It's not just me about steroids. So that's SN Education. I'll link that. And then obviously the website, how I got propelled into all this is Supplement Needs, the supplement brand. So I can put the link below for that.
And what's your social media? Instagram, YouTube? You have a YouTube, right? Or you're just, it's like a ghost town.
The YouTube's a ghost town. I have over 1,000 subscribers. I feel sorry for them. How? But my handle on everything is Dean STM. Maybe sometime if the book gets done, I will make an appearance onto YouTube. I have the nice camera now after you broke my balls over a camera and a proper mic.
You can't come on my YouTube channel if you don't have a proper mic, man.
And Dean, we have hours of content together on my channel.
Yeah,
so people
I
like
hear
Dean, they can always watch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there is a link on my Instagram in the link tree for every podcast I've ever done, including yours, Stephen, like a historical list where I've listed, there must be like 100 podcasts over the years that are all there for people to follow and listen to for free.
Cool. That's good. Kurt, where can people find you in the meantime?
Instagram, Kurt.Havens, YouTube, Kurt.Havens. I try to keep it really simple. And here monthly, apparently.
Awesome. Yeah, we should do this monthly, guys. So next month, I want to discuss why do steroids have diminishing returns? And then we can go into the androgen receptors, myostatin, SHBG, binding proteins, implications of free androgens, etc. And I'm sure we can come up with a couple more topics in the meantime. Dear audience, if you have some suggestions, post it down below. Get the algorithm going. And if you agree with the Anabolic Roundtable, even though that was originally taken by Dan Duchesne, I like this title. I can be Sir Lancelot because I do a lot of injections. And then Kurt can be Merlin because you age backwards.
Okay.
Dean, who do you want to be? Do you want to be King Arthur?
King Arthur or Sir Anabolics.
Sir Anabolics. Good, I got it. All right, guys, we'll drop this every month. Thanks, guys, so much for watching, and leave a couple comments and likes for the algorithm. That really helps us out. And we'll see you next month on the Anabolic Roundtable. For now, Kurt, Dean, and Steve, we are out.
Thank you.
Take care.